Hey, we're glad you're here. I have in my history, I have certain things that I really gravitated to growing up. One of them was the Peanuts, Charlie Brown comic strips, right? Anybody remember those? I know comic strips aren't popular today, or they are. They're called graphic novels. I know that's a whole different, I'm not paying that for a graphic novel like that, so I don't read them. My son does, loves them. But Peanuts was one of my favorites. And there's this one scene that just always used to crack me up between Linus and his older sister Lucy. If you don't know, Lucy's his older sister, and she's bossy. She's opinionated. She's the one that sits behind the little desk and always offers advice for 5 cents. It's probably gone up today, and she just kind of has that way about her, right? Linus, younger brother, he is kind of the philosopher of the group. He's the one that is the historian. He is even kind of a resident theologian at times. Linus is a very sharp guy, but he has this one thing about him. He carries a blanket all the time. He's always got this security blanket, and his sister thinks that's pretty weird, and she doesn't. She's pretty hateful with him. And there's one scene where she's kind of just unleashing on him because he's just confided in her that he wants to be a doctor when he grows up. So here's the exchange. It starts out like this. You, a doctor, that's a big laugh, she says to him. She says, you could never be a doctor. You know why? Because you don't love mankind, that's why. I love that. You don't love mankind. Now, he sits there for a second. Now look at his response, because this is genius. I love mankind. It's just people I can't stand. I love cartoons. I love comics because they make us laugh about things that make us uncomfortable. And the reality is, when he says, I love mankind, but I don't love people, he really exposes most of us, right? In fact, I would venture to say he exposes every one of us in this room. That it's easy to love mankind. In fact, we love the idea of loving mankind. We love loving people at a global level, right? We love thinking about a world where our skin color doesn't cause a response of hate, right? We all love thinking about that. We love thinking about a world where gender is not used as a source of power, right? Where we squish people because of their gender. We love thinking about a world where our personal abilities are not used against us to kind of create levels in society. Where my personal ability is not used to either push me down or lift me up in a certain culture. We love thinking about a world where quirkiness is not treated as an inferiority problem, right? We love thinking about a world where disabilities don't lessen our human value. We love loving mankind. That's not a problem. It's the individual people that we start to have problems with. We love thinking about global love. We love thinking about a global utopian society like Linus. But you start to talk about the individuals, right? The nosy coworker in your office who just absolutely cannot stay out of anybody's business. The backstabbing sister-in-law that you had to spend yesterday afternoon with, that you just cringe every time you have to be around her because of what she did or said in the past. The know-it-all sibling, and believe me, in my family, I learned as I got older, my siblings, my own brother and sister, they called me the golden child growing up. And I just always wanted to say, well, at least you didn't grow up with Jesus as your sibling, right? I mean, come on, what are you going to do with that? I'm not Jesus, okay? I know you think I added pressure to the family at times. I'm sorry, but I'm not the golden child. But think about it. We love the idea of loving humanity. It's just people, bringing it down to that busybody neighbor. The person who keeps calling the HOA because you didn't cut your grass last week. There's always that one person around. Yeah, see, I hear the rumble in the audience. There's always that one person in our world that creates that problem for us. That we know we're supposed to love everybody. In fact, Linus really understands the concept. We should love everybody always. It just should be that way. But those individuals come into our life. They make it hard, right? We're in this series called This Is Us. It's our relationship series. We're talking about relationships that are hard and messy, real life things, right? This is because that's what the world is made of. And as we talk about it, we're kind of asking the question, look, who are we supposed to be in these relationships? These vital, pivotal relationships all around us. Who are we supposed to be? how do we live into relationships in a healthy manner? This morning, I want to talk today about the fears and frustrations, the things that we hold against people sometime. And instead of holding on to them, how do we become the kind of people that exhibit compassion, that express compassion for those around us? We're going to look very quickly this morning at a story. It's one I've used before. I use it a lot because I absolutely love this story in the scriptures. This story we're going to take it from Luke this morning. It is one that you don't even have to have gone to church growing up. This story is very well known. This story is one of those stories that it has become famous just for its principle alone. In fact, non-Christians love to use this story to talk about how Christians should behave, right? So it is well known. The story involves Jesus starting with an interaction with a lawyer. I know it sounds like a bad joke, but it's not. Jesus and this lawyer walk into a bar, right? If you don't think Jesus would walk into a bar, then you need to study more about Jesus because he would do just that. But here's the thing. Jesus and this lawyer kind of start to exchange comments. The lawyer starts to test him, ask him some things. But the amazing thing to me is that Jesus is never the guy who's trying to stir it up. At least not like you would think he would. Jesus didn't walk around a town and saying, hey, we need to take over the government. Jesus never walked around town and excluded people from his meetings, saying, you can't come, I don't like you. He didn't kick anybody out. He didn't walk around town protesting other groups. He didn't have signs and banners he would put up to represent his movement. He didn't make fun of people who didn't believe in him. He was always inviting. He was always willing to have the conversation, and he was always willing to expose people to this idea of a reconciled relationship with God, of walking personally with the God of the universe. That's what he did. But every time you see him get into these conversations with people in the scriptures, in these stories, as the apostles are retelling them, he gets into a conversation, and these people are just like not happy with him. And you can pick that up in this conversation. Go to Luke 10, verse 25. It says, and behold, a lawyer stood up to put him to the test, right? Already it sounds like a lawyer. If you're a lawyer, I'm sorry, that's just what you do, right? He stood up to put him to the test, saying, teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Teacher, rabbi, what am I supposed to do? How do I get to this place where we know that there's going to be this really good life after death thing? We've heard talk about it. We know it's out there. How do I get there? Verse 26, Jesus says to him, what is written in the law? How do you read it? Jesus uses this legal way of talking to him. He turns it back. He just asks a really good question. And this is how they would banter in his day a lot. He says, how do you read it? The law was given to the Jews as a way of God revealing himself to the world. Now, if you haven't read the Old Testament much, I know you've heard from other people because they talk about the weird things that are in the Old Testament. You have to understand that God, when he enters the culture, he's always entering a culture where the people are at. And the Old Testament is full, prior to Jesus coming on the scene, with very, very rigid laws and rules. Not because God's trying to be mean, he's just trying to reveal himself to people. He's trying to reveal his level of love, his compassion for people, and yet his perfection. He's trying to reveal to us that he cannot be moved. He cannot lie. There are things about him that are true and will always be true. That's what makes him God. And he's given the Old Testament law and prophets, these men that spoke for him, he's given them these words and these outlines and these ways to live and do relationship so that he can reveal himself through their culture. Right? God chose the Israelites to be his people so that they could show the rest of the world who he was. So when Jesus says to this lawyer, he goes, how do you read the law? It's a bigger question than just how do you interpret this thing. He's asking him, what's the why behind how you live? Why do you exist? This lawyer, this teacher, this one who has studied the law should have been able to say, we are here to reveal God to the world. That's what he should have very easily said, right? And he gets very close because when Jesus asks him, Jesus basically sets him up to answer with the right answer. The lawyer begins with something that's called the Shema. This is a daily prayer that the Hebrew people would have always prayed every day. Here's how they started their day. Verse 27, he answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus says to him, "You've answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." Note the emphasis. Note how he sets him up. Jesus says, how do you interpret this thing? And he immediately responds with the law. He responds with the right text. He responds with a daily prayer that doesn't, look at the verses, doesn't talk about go and do. It doesn't list a list. It doesn't give them the 10 commandments straight up. It doesn't start with the first thing that comes to having eternal life, to being with God forever, is not about us doing. He starts with a heart issue. He starts with this thing about loving others. He starts with this thing about expressing love out of our love for God, not doing because we have to earn God's love. Do you follow me? It's radically different. Our world today, everything is about your performance, right? Your job, even raising kids, right? You know you're doing a good job if the teacher doesn't call you every day of the week, right? If the teacher doesn't tell you, hey, your kid did this today, they did this today, you don't get that report card every Friday afternoon or whatever, or now it's live time. I know that. My kids didn't quite have all of that, but now it's live time, right? Like you get text messages when your kid messes up. Anybody just sweat the day when you get a message, you're thinking, oh no, not my kid again. We measure so much of our success in life by these things. And our kids are at the top of the list, right? But I want you to understand what he did. Instead of pointing to a list of things to do, he talks about an inner disposition. He talks about a change of heart. He talks about a transformation, not some kind of outward qualification. He doesn't tell the lawyer, you have to be good enough. He says you need to experience a change. Your heart needs to be made soft. It needs to be favorable to God. It needs to reflect a transformation from the inside out. That you're willing to approach God, that you're willing to listen to God, that you're willing to allow God to reveal himself to you. It's a shift in priorities. The reason we have trouble loving all of mankind, or we find it easier to love all of mankind in theory, but we have trouble loving the neighbors right next to us, is because it's about our priorities. I get caught out a lot. I've told you this story before, but it's happened recently again. I get caught in conversations with people during the week, or the one that really sticks out in the last few years, what happened at a party, where people want to ask me, what do you do? And I finally come around and tell them what I do for a living. And then they want to pin everything that goes wrong in culture on me, or this church, or the church in general, or God in general, or the Bible, because it's incorrect. We all know it's incorrect, right? I mean, they just want to they want to start with just pinning all of these wrongs on me or the church. It happens so often, and I say this to you often, that right, our behaviors are grounded in our beliefs. So I get that people can look at some of the things that have happened in history and say, what's wrong with the church? See how these behaviors have been bad. But the thing is, when Jesus starts talking to this lawyer, he immediately transitions everything away from behavior to a transformation of heart. He transitions us to our priorities, to the things that are going on internally, right? He recorded, Jesus actually, there's a record of another saying that in John John wrote this down in verse 28 of chapter 6. He said, then this crowd, a different crowd, said to him, what must we do to be doing the works of God? What's it look like to do the works of God? And Jesus answered and said, this is the work of God. Now, you would think at this point, he's now going to say, here's the work of God. Go and do X, Y, and Z. But look what he says. This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent. It always starts with our heart. It always starts with a transformation internally. It always starts with our perspective, our priorities. You know why it's hard to love your neighbor? Because our priorities are off. It's just messed up. And we're gonna get into the story more in just a second and find out a real good reason why our priorities are off. But the reality is our priorities are off. It has to start with a different position before God, a different perspective about who Jesus is. It has to start with a surrender. Religion says perform and God will love you. Jesus said surrender. Surrender. God already loves you. We don't do to earn God's favor. We do because God loved us. He already favored us, right? We divorce, though. See, we divorce all of this stuff. And what we do is we start heaping rules upon rules upon rules. And we look at our neighbors and we think, well, they need to be more like us. Or I can't believe our neighbors live this way. Or I can't believe they do this. Or they let their kids do this. And we start putting these behaviors on them. And all we're doing is telling them that our priorities are off. I've always said that rules without relationship will lead to rebellion. If you're a parent, you need to write that down. Like that's a primary thing you ought to know as a parent, that if you try to set up rules in your house without having a relationship, good relationship with your kids, they're going to rebel. Well, the same thing happened to us. If you just expect that to earn God's favor, you just have to behave your way into his presence, you're going to end up rebelling. Because our priorities aren't different. This is why we allow our neighbors to irritate us. I said it this way. True compassion is based on surrender to Jesus, not our struggles with people. True compassion, we think sometimes that, I could be more compassionate if people would be compassionate back to me. You ever been in one of those Starbucks line? I know nobody in here goes to Starbucks, but if you've ever been in a Starbucks line, have you ever been in the one where there's a line of cars and you start to get a little frustrated that maybe it's taking too long, but when you get up there, you realize that the car in front of you paid for your drink, and then all of a sudden you're caught, right? Like you're caught right then, because now you've got to make an instantaneous decision. Do you just take the drink and bolt and thank you, or do you pay for the person behind you, right? And if you're in that line, you kind of, if you're like me, you say, well, I got to pay for the person behind me because this is really cool. Like somebody initiated this. I don't know how many cars up they initiated this, but because they initiated compassion on me, I'll initiate compassion backwards. See, the model of Christ is not the Starbucks line. He wants you to initiate compassion no matter who initiates. It's not about you waiting for somebody to initiate compassion on you. It's not about me waiting for somebody to initiate compassion on me. It's about initiating compassion because my priorities have changed. True compassion is based on my surrender to Christ, the fact that I give myself up to him every day. And as hard as that is to imagine or even to struggle with or wrestle with all day long, it is the reality of what we're being asked to do. It's not about my struggles with my neighbor. It's not about the fact that people are just weird, or people are mean, or people are rude, or they're unbiblical. It never falls into the equation. It's about my surrender first to Christ. If we don't start there, we'll never have compassion. And I know some of you are thinking, well, I don't even know that I trust Christ, really. I'm just telling you, this is what we're called to if we're struggling to follow Jesus. And so many of us, we've heard it told different ways, and we've seen it modeled poorly. And you know this to be true. We see these little exclusive groups that band together inside churches or maybe in neighborhoods, and we get these proud moments where we just think we're better than everybody else, right? And so any compassion that comes from us has to be earned. You have to buy my Starbucks first, and then I'll be compassionate on you. That is not the model. Do you initiate the pay it forward, or are you simply responding? It's a change, a transformation in our hearts. And God revealed that in the life of Christ, right? The fact that he came from heaven, that God surrendered his own son to live, to walk among us, to serve, to die, and to be resurrected so that we could experience resurrection. So we don't have to worry about that death piece that we'll all face one day. Watch the story as it continues. Luke 10. Now we get into the bulk of the story. You know a version of this, even if you've never read it. I'm going to read it straight down, starting in verse 29. But he, desiring to justify himself, this is talking about the lawyer, says to Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Right? Just throw back a good question, right? That's what it's all about. If you're a good lawyer, you can ask a good question. He wants to kind of look good in front of his peers. So let's just push this Jesus guy a little bit further. Jesus replies. And I love this because he doesn't reply directly. He starts with a story. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. We don't know who he was. And he fell among robbers who stripped him, beat him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Okay, very quick summary. He was beaten and left in the street. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, somebody else who's a part of the temple system, right? These men of God who were supposed to train and teach and direct the worship of God in the local communities. This Levite is going by, and when he came to the place and saw him laying in the road, passed by on the other side. But then a Samaritan. If you don't know, at this point in the story, there would have been a real hush in the crowd. There would have been a shock. Can I try to help you? It's like Jesus comes up and says, but then this prostitute showed up, right? Because Samaritans were half Jews who had intermarried and they had blended the law of God, and they had kind of mixed things up a little bit, and they had strayed from some of the rules, and so they were very not favored, right? A Samaritan comes by. As he journeyed, came to where he was, the man laying in the streets. When he saw him, he had compassion. And he went to him and he bound up his wounds, pouring oil and wine on him. And then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day he took out 200 denarii. Let me help you out here because I had to look this up. 100 denarii in 2010, I found a resource. In 2010, 100 denarii was the equivalent of 4 months' salary in 2010, about $11,700. 200 denarii was close to $24,000. Are you with me? If you see me laying in the street later, just cut the check, all right? $24,000. He says to the innkeeper, take care of him. Whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. Which of these three, Jesus says, do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? Now watch this. Watch this because the real answer is who? The Samaritan, right? You're whispering it. The Samaritan. Look what he says. The lawyer says, the one who showed him mercy. He couldn't even say his name. He couldn't call him what Jesus called him. There was no way he wanted to say Samaritan. Again, I mean no disrespect, but I think in your neighborhood, if you say, who showed the most love today to some of our kids on the playground? Was it the drug dealer? See, we don't have a stomach for that. I need you just to feel a little bit of the shock. I'm not saying that Jesus is saying that the guy was all right. He's just, his response was the godly response he was looking for. He showed mercy. He had compassion. Jesus says, you go and do likewise. Like whatever you think you've learned from the law, you're not getting it. I need you to go and do like this guy's doing. So not only is true compassion about our surrender to Christ, right? Not worrying about our struggles with people and the way our neighbors anger us. True compassion also is based on need, not net worth. Follow me. It's based on need, not net worth. When the priest and the Levite chose to walk on the other side of the road, do you know what they chose? They chose their net worth. They chose their own net worth. Whatever fear they had for their own personal lives, whatever concerns they had about their own personal, the way they would be perceived in their community, whatever fear they had, because there were rules about priests and Levites and being able to touch dead bodies and then go to worship at the temple. They would have to go through purification rituals. God didn't allow that, right? And again, remember, it's because he was trying to teach them something. So whatever they were worried about how people would perceive them, they chose their own net worth over the needs of a man laying bloodied and beaten in the street. Maybe they were worried that they were going to get jumped too. Maybe they were worried that they would lose their lives. Maybe they were worried that they wouldn't be able to go to the temple on time to be with everybody. Whatever it was, their own net worth over getting involved. That's what they chose. True compassion is based on need, not net worth. Jesus says, I'm not asking you if the person was correct. I'm not asking you if their theology was right. I'm not asking you if they were the most moral person. I'm telling you they were in need. And a heart that's fully surrendered to Christ responds to needs. And by the way, it doesn't judge other people who don't. This is a very personal message in some ways. But it's also a corporate message. It's why even as a church, we have tried over the years to continue to funnel money out to help people in places of need, even though maybe it's not in our budget all the time. Because we believe we've got to keep helping others. That's what we're called to do. We want to be known in this community as a church that walks a certain way, that our surrender to Christ actually rearranges, changes our hearts. And we're not worried about whether or not we can pay for an AC to get fixed. We're really worried about somebody who maybe can't put food on their table at times, right? And we've tried to respond that way. That our priorities need to be changed. That our hearts need to be transformed. True compassion is based on need, not net worth, but that frustrates us. And you've got somebody in your life, and I do too, that when you think about them, you think to yourself, Lord, please just don't let me have to deal with them this week, right? Please don't let me have to put up with them this week. Please don't let me have to interact with them this week. Please don't let them call me with another issue, another problem this week. Paul makes a statement to the Galatian church, and he's talking about how Christians should live. And I love this passage in Galatians 5. He says this in verse 13. He says, "For you were called to freedom, brothers." Now watch this. "Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another." In other words, as Christians who's had their hearts transformed, who's had your priorities rearranged, understand this. You're not held to the sin of the world, right? You're not held to these actions, these things that your sinful nature is constantly struggling with. Your mistakes are not going to plague you for all eternity if you follow Christ. But he says, don't use that as a way to go out and just do whatever you want. Look what he says, verse 14, "For the whole law is fulfilled with one word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." Verse 15, "But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you're not consumed by one another." What do we see today? I can't speak to the world. I can only speak to the culture I live in. And what I see when I live in this culture is we're devouring one another. We are devouring one another. We've chosen to bite at each other. We've chosen to allow all these different things to irritate us, to get under our skin. And we're devouring one another. And can I just be brutally honest? Our communities need a model of a transformed heart. They need to see the reality of the gospel that's willing to love people in spite of their personal preferences and opinions. And I kept trying to figure out, how do we drive this home? How do we talk about this? So I did something that I don't know if this is going to work for you, but I want you to turn your attention, maybe have this half look at this screen, this half look at this screen, whatever is comfortable to you. I want you to look at the screen. And I'm going to ask Sarah to begin in just a second to scroll through some slides, leaving them up 3 or 4 seconds at a time. There's about a dozen of them. Sarah, throw the first slide up there. Look at the faces on the screen. Your daily routine, your weekly activities, does your life reflect love? Does it reflect the love of God? Does it reflect the compassion of Christ who sacrificed himself for you? Or the pictures, the faces of the people on the screen, do they cause an internal gut reaction? Do they cause your heart to drift away from love? And instead, does it cause you to just get anxious and upset? Do your priorities start to change when you see some of these images? When you start to see political images, or immigrant images, or disability images, or ethnic images, does something in your heart relax because your God has called you to something bigger than what's on the screen? Or do the images cause you to rearrange your priorities, to put your stake in the ground, and to say, you're not going to push me off my opinions? Where does your heart drift? Have you experienced that transformation of heart? Is the love of Christ messing with you today? Making you uncomfortable as you realize that we all have prejudices, that we're all like Linus. We love the idea of mankind, but man, our neighbors are killing us. Here's my closing thought. A guy that I really like, if you've never read his book, Love Does, a guy, an author named Bob Goff, is one of the most phenomenal speakers you'll ever hear. Get online, Google his talks. He's a lawyer of all things. And the man is never not happy, it seems like. He just wrote a new book called Everyone Always. And my family listened to part of it on vacation, and we decided we didn't like it because it just messed with us. Because all of a sudden, all of these people kept coming into our daily routine on our vacation. By the way, vacation at the Linky household is really something we hold on to tight because we don't get a lot of space like that sometimes. So when people come in and start to get into our little vacation circle, we sometimes get a little offended, right? Until God broke through this year and said, you get to go on vacation, but you don't get to go with your own priorities all the time. So here's what I leave you with. That we really are called, this is us, this is who we want to be, that we would love everyone always. That we would love everyone always. That's our calling. That should be the heart transformation. That's the difference in priorities. And that's the way a community of Christ lives in a community. We may not get to do everything you think we should do. I get it. I wish we had an unlimited amount of money to give away. We don't. We cannot meet every need. But you know what we can do? We can love everyone always. We can't take care of every mother who doesn't have enough food on the table, but you know what we can do? We can love everyone always. And probably we can invite them over for dinner. We may not be able to meet everybody's needs for medical bills or utility bills, but you know what we can do? We can love everyone always. This is us. This is who we want to be. The kind of people that love everyone always. Let me pray for us.